She called me a boring loser in a Honda and bet our whole life on her coworker. Now they've lost their jobs, their money, and their reputations while I'm just getting started.
My name is Evan Marks, and I'm about to tell you how I destroyed my wife's life with nothing but patience, a decent understanding of contract law, and the kind of vindictive creativity that only comes from 23 years of marriage to a woman who thinks I'm an idiot. Let me paint you a picture of my perfectly average existence. I'm 49, work as a finance manager at Hartwell Industries, drive a 7-year-old Honda Civic, and live in a Rust Belt city where the most exciting thing that happens is when the Dairy Queen gets a new flavor. My wife Marta is 47, works as a creative director at T-Bold Advertising, and has spent the last 5 years treating me like I'm something she stepped in. Evan, did you remember to pick up my dry cleaning? Marta called from the kitchen as I walked through the front door, loosening my tie. No hello, no how was your day, just straight to business. It's hanging in the closet, I replied, settling into my recliner with a beer. Same place it's been for the last 3 hours. She appeared in the doorway, perfectly styled blonde hair not moving despite her obvious irritation. Don't get smart with me. I had a long day dealing with actual important things. Actual important things. Like designing ads for local car dealerships and pretending she's the next Don Draper. But I kept my mouth shut, sipped my beer, and watched her disappear back into the kitchen where she was hosting another one of her girls' nights. The voices from the kitchen carried into the living room, and I couldn't help but overhear the conversation. Marta's sister, Victoria, was there, along with her friend Diane from next door and a few other women whose names I'd stopped bothering to remember. I'm telling you, Jake could bench press me into next week, one of them giggled. Have you seen his arms? Jake, that would be Jake Turnbull, Marta's coworker at the agency. 42 years old, drives a vintage BMW, and apparently has arms worth discussing at length during girls' night. Some women have all the luck, Victoria chimed in. Working with a man like that every day. Well, Marta's voice lowered conspiratorially. Let's just say the overtime at the office has been very rewarding lately. The women erupted in laughter, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach. I turned up the volume on the TV, but the damage was done. The pieces were starting to form a picture I didn't want to see. Our kids, Ross and Amelia, were both away at college, which meant it was just Marta and me rattling around in this 3-bedroom house like two strangers who happened to share a mortgage. Ross was 22, working on his master's degree, and had inherited my sarcastic sense of humor along with his mother's complete lack of interest in coming home for visits. Amelia was 20, sweet but naive, and still believed her parents had a happy marriage. The girls' night broke up around 10, and I listened to the parade of goodbyes and air kisses from my chair. When the front door finally closed, Marta came into the living room, checking her phone. I'm going to bed, she announced without looking at me. Big day tomorrow? I asked. Always. She paused at the bottom of the stairs. Oh, I'll be working late again tomorrow night. Don't wait up. Working late, right. I'd been hearing that phrase a lot lately, usually accompanied by Marta coming home with her hair slightly messed up and her lipstick completely gone. After she went upstairs, I sat in the dark for a while, thinking about Jake Turnbull and his impressive arms, thinking about working late and rewarding overtime, thinking about how my wife had been treating me like an inconvenience for months. But mostly, I was thinking about the prenuptial agreement we'd signed 23 years ago. You see, when Marta and I got married, her mother, the formidable Mrs. Kaminsky, had insisted on a prenup. Not because I was poor, but because she was convinced I was a gold digger who would eventually try to take advantage of her daughter's superior breeding and intelligence. The irony wasn't lost on me even then. The prenup was ironclad. In the event of divorce, each party kept what they brought into the marriage, plus whatever they could prove they'd earned individually during the marriage. The house was in both names, but I'd made every mortgage payment from my salary while Marta spent hers on clothes, spa treatments, and apparently hotel rooms with Jake. I went to bed that night with a plan forming in my head. If Marta wanted to play games, I was about to show her that the quiet guy in the Honda Civic had been paying attention all along. The next morning, Marta was already gone when I woke up. She'd left a note on the kitchen counter. Working early. Don't know when I'll be home. I called in sick to work, something I'd done maybe 3 times in the past decade, and drove to T-Bold Advertising. The building was a converted warehouse in the arts district, all exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows. Very trendy, very Marta. I parked across the street and waited. At 11:30, Marta emerged from the building with Jake Turnbull. Even from a distance, I could see why the girls found him impressive. Tall, broad-shouldered, perfectly styled hair, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my car payment. They walked to his BMW, a pristine 1980s model in midnight blue, and he opened the passenger door for her. How chivalrous. They drove off together, and I followed at a distance, my heart pounding with a mixture of rage and anticipation. The BMW pulled into the parking lot of the Grandview Hotel, an upscale place downtown where the rooms start at $200 a night. I watched from across the street as they walked into the lobby together, Jake's hand on the small of Marta's back. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, staring at the hotel entrance and feeling 23 years of marriage crumble around me. Then I took out my phone and started recording everything. The next few days passed in a blur of surveillance and growing fury. I'd become an expert at following my own wife, learning her patterns, documenting her lies. Every working late was actually a trip to the Grandview Hotel. Every client dinner was room service for two. I was sitting in my car outside the hotel on a Thursday afternoon when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You don't know half of it. Check her office. Third drawer, left side of desk. I stared at the message for a long time. Someone else knew what was happening. Someone wanted me to find out more. That night, I waited until Marta was asleep, then drove to T-Bold Advertising. The building had security, but I'd noticed during my surveillance that the guy working nights was more interested in his phone than the monitors. I waited until he made his rounds, then slipped in through a side door that employees used for smoke breaks. The agency's offices were on the third floor. I took the stairs, my heart hammering against my ribs. If I got caught, I'd have a hard time explaining what I was doing, breaking into my wife's workplace at midnight. Marta's office was at the end of the hall, her name on the door in elegant script. The door was locked, but I'd brought a small screwdriver and a credit card. It took me 15 minutes of fumbling in the dark before I heard the click. Her office was exactly what you'd expect. Modern furniture, motivational posters, a window overlooking the city. I went straight to her desk and pulled open the third drawer on the left. What I found there made my blood run cold. There were hotel receipts going back 6 months, love notes written on T-bold letterhead, photos of Marta and Jake at various restaurants and hotels, looking very much like a couple. But worst of all, there were printed emails between Marta and Jake discussing their future together. Once I get rid of Evan, we can be together properly, one email read. He's so pathetic, he probably won't even fight the divorce. Another email was even more damning. I've been talking to my lawyer. The prenup might be a problem, but if we can prove he's been hiding assets or cheating, we might be able to break it. The final email made me see red. Jake, I've been thinking about the Peterson account. If we can pin the failure on Evan somehow, it would give me grounds to claim he damaged my career. My lawyer says that could be worth a lot in court. I photographed everything with my phone, my hands shaking with rage. They weren't just having an affair. They were planning to frame me for professional misconduct to get around the prenup. I was so focused on the documents that I almost missed the sound of footsteps in the hallway. The security guard was making an unscheduled round. I shoved everything back into the drawer and looked around frantically for an escape route. The footsteps were getting closer. I could see a flashlight beam moving under the door. There was a supply closet in the corner of the office. I dove inside just as the door handle turned. Through the crack in the closet door, I watched the security guard shine his flashlight around the office, checking the windows and behind the desk. He stood there for what felt like an hour, but was probably only a few minutes. Finally, he left, locking the door behind him. I waited another 10 minutes before emerging from the closet and making my escape. The next morning, I called my old college roommate Mike, who worked as a private investigator. We met at a diner across town, where I showed him the photos I'd taken. Jesus, Evan, Mike said, scrolling through the images on my phone. She's really going for the throat. I need copies of everything, I told him, and I need to know exactly what they're planning. Mike nodded. I can help with that, but what are you planning to do with this information? I smiled for the first time in weeks. I'm going to destroy them both. That afternoon, I made an appointment with Harold Brennan, the lawyer who'd handled our prenup 23 years ago. Harold was in his 70s now, but his mind was still sharp as a razor. Evan Marks, he said, shaking my hand in his wood-paneled office. I haven't seen you since you signed that prenup. How's married life treating you? That's what I'm here to discuss, I said, and laid out everything I'd discovered. Harold listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or making notes. When I finished, he leaned back in his leather chair and smiled. "Your wife picked the wrong man to mess with," he said. "That prenup I wrote is bulletproof. Even if she could prove infidelity, which she can't because you haven't been unfaithful, it wouldn't matter. The agreement specifically states that cheating by either party doesn't affect the financial arrangements." What about their plan to frame me for the Peterson account? Professional misconduct claims would have to be proven in a separate proceeding before they could affect the divorce settlement. And based on what you've shown me, it looks like your wife is the one who's been using company resources for personal activities. Harold opened a file cabinet and pulled out our original prenup. "Do you remember the cheating clause, Evan?" I shook my head. It had been over 2 decades. "If either party commits cheating, the innocent party is entitled to immediate possession of all marital assets pending divorce proceedings. The cheating spouse gets nothing except what they can prove they owned before the marriage." I felt a grin spreading across my face. "So if I can prove Marta's having an affair, you get the house, the cars, the bank accounts, everything. She gets her clothes and whatever furniture she brought into the marriage 23 years ago, which was basically nothing." "Exactly." Harold leaned forward. "But Evan, you need to be smart about this. If you tip your hand too early, she might try to hide assets or claim you've been abusive. We need to build an airtight case before we make our move." I left Harold's office feeling better than I had in months. Marta thought she was playing chess, but she didn't realize I'd been watching the board the whole time. That evening, Marta came home at her usual time, which meant she'd been at the hotel until 6, then stopped somewhere to fix her makeup and come up with her story for the day. "How was work?" I asked innocently. "Exhausting," she sighed, not looking at me. "The Peterson account is turning into a nightmare. I might have to work this weekend to salvage it." The Peterson account, the one she was planning to blame on me. "That's too bad," I said. "Maybe Jake can help you with it." She looked up sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing, just that he seems like a capable guy. I'm sure he'd be happy to put in some overtime to help you out." Marta's face went pale, but she recovered quickly. "Jake's very professional. I'm sure he'll do whatever it takes to help the team succeed." I'm sure he will, I thought. I'm sure he will. The anonymous tipster contacted me again 2 days later. "Saturday, 2 p.m., Grandview Hotel, room 1722, bring a camera." I spent Friday night planning my approach. I couldn't just barge into their hotel room. That would be breaking and entering. But I could position myself to document them entering and leaving together, and maybe catch them in a compromising position if they were careless about the curtains. Saturday afternoon found me in the Grandview Hotel's parking lot, camera ready. At exactly 2:15, Jake's BMW pulled into the lot. I watched through my telephoto lens as they got out of the car, Jake's arm around Marta's waist, both of them laughing at some private joke. They walked into the hotel like they owned the place. I gave them 10 minutes, then followed them inside. The Grandview's lobby was all marble and crystal, the kind of place that made you feel underdressed even in your best suit. I positioned myself behind a newspaper in the lobby bar, with a clear view of the elevators. At 4:30, they came down together. Marta's hair was messed up, her lipstick completely gone. Jake had his suit jacket slung over his arm, and his shirt was wrinkled. They weren't even trying to hide what they'd been doing. I followed them outside and watched as Jake walked Marta to her car. She'd apparently driven separately to avoid suspicion. They kissed goodbye in the parking lot, a long, passionate kiss that made my stomach turn. After Marta drove away, I approached Jake's BMW. The car was his pride and joy, a perfectly restored 1985 325i that he'd probably spent more money on than most people make in a year. I took out my keys and carved "adulterer" into the paint along the driver's side door. Then I used a small knife to slash both tires on the passenger side. As I walked back to my car, I could hear Jake's voice echoing across the parking lot. "What the hell? What the hell?" I drove home with a smile on my face. It was a small victory, but it felt good to finally fight back. That evening, Marta came home in a foul mood. "Some psychopath vandalized Jake's car at the hotel," she said, pacing around the living room. "Slashed his tires, keyed the paint. Who does something like that?" "That's terrible," I said, not looking up from my book. "Did he call the police?" "Of course he called the police. But what are they going to do? There were no witnesses, no cameras in that part of the parking lot." "Well, yeah," I said, "maybe he shouldn't park in such secluded areas. You never know what kind of people are lurking around hotels in the middle of the afternoon." Marta shot me a sharp look, but I kept my expression neutral. She had no way of knowing I was involved, and even if she suspected, she couldn't prove anything. The following Monday, I received another anonymous text. Check your wife's email. Password is Jake2019. I waited until Marta was in the shower, then opened her laptop. Sure enough, the password worked. What I found in her email account was even more damaging than what I discovered in her office. There were dozens of emails between Marta and Jake going back 8 months. They detailed not just their affair, but their entire plan to get rid of me and start a new life together. I can't stand living with him anymore, one email read. He's so boring, so predictable. When I think about spending the rest of my life with someone who gets excited about tax refunds, I want to scream. Another email was more specific about their plans. My lawyer says if we can prove Evan has been hiding money or cheating, we can break the prenup. But we need evidence. Can you think of anything we could use? Jake's response made me laugh out loud. What if we set up a fake affair for him? Get some woman to claim they've been sleeping together? Too risky, Marta had replied. He's too pathetic to cheat. No woman would believe she'd been sleeping with him voluntarily. I printed out the most damaging emails and added them to my growing file of evidence. Marta and Jake were digging their own graves, and they didn't even realize it. The next phase of my plan required patience. I needed to let them think they were winning, let them get careless and make mistakes. So I played the role of the oblivious husband, coming home every night to find Marta working late or out with the girls. But I was documenting everything. Every lie, every hotel visit, every email. I was building a case that would destroy both of them. 3 weeks later, my patience was rewarded. I received a text from Marta. Working very late tonight. Don't wait up. Might not be home until morning. An overnight stay. They were getting bolder. I drove to the Grandview Hotel and confirmed that both cars were in the parking lot. Then I went home and waited. At 2 a.m., I drove back to the hotel. Jake's BMW was still there, but now it was parked under a streetlight where I could get a clear view of the license plate. I photographed the car, the hotel entrance, and the timestamp on my phone. At 7 a.m., I was back in position. I watched as Marta emerged from the hotel, looking around nervously before walking quickly to her car. 5 minutes later, Jake came out, straightening his tie and checking his watch. I had them, documented, photographed, and completely unaware that their perfect plan was about to blow up in their faces. That morning, Marta came home at her usual time, acting like she'd been at work all night. Rough night at the office? I asked. You have no idea, she said, not meeting my eyes. But I think we finally got the Peterson account back on track. The Peterson account. The one they were still planning to blame on me. I smiled and poured myself a cup of coffee. That's great, honey. I'm proud of you for working so hard. She looked at me suspiciously, like she was trying to figure out if I was being sarcastic. But I kept my expression innocent and supportive. Let her wonder. In a few more weeks, wondering would be the least of her problems. I met with Harold Brennan again on a Thursday morning, bringing with me a thick folder of evidence that had grown considerably over the past month. This is impressive work, Evan, Harold said, reviewing the photographs, emails, and documentation I'd compiled. Your wife has been very thorough in documenting her own cheating. What's our next move? We file for divorce immediately, citing cheating and seeking immediate possession of all marital assets under the prenup clause. But first, we need to make sure she can't hide anything. Harold explained the process. We would file the papers on a Friday afternoon, ensuring that Marta couldn't access bank accounts or attempt to transfer assets over the weekend. A process server would deliver the papers to her at work in front of her colleagues for maximum impact. What about Jake? I asked. That's where it gets interesting, Harold smiled. Jake is married. His wife Diana is a prominent family law attorney. I think she'd be very interested to know what her husband has been doing with company time and resources. I hadn't known Jake was married. This was getting better by the minute. There's one more thing, Harold said. The prenup has a clause that allows you to claim damages for emotional distress caused by cheating. Given the evidence we have of their planning and scheming, we could be looking at a significant financial settlement. How significant? Well, your wife's been using company resources for personal activities, which could cost her her job. Jake's been doing the same, plus he's opened himself up to a lawsuit from his own wife. Between the two of them, they're looking at professional ruin and significant financial liability. I left Harold's office feeling like I was walking on air. After months of being treated like an idiot, I was about to show Marta and Jake exactly how smart the quiet guy in the Honda Civic could be. The papers were filed the following Friday. I spent the morning at work, acting completely normal, while Harold handled the legal proceedings. At 3 p.m., a process server walked into T-Bold Advertising and asked for Marta Marks. I wasn't there to see it, but Mike had positioned himself across the street with a camera. He told me later that Marta had gone white as a sheet when she read the papers, then started screaming at the process server like it was his fault. The best part was that Jake had been standing right next to her when it happened. According to Mike, Jake had tried to comfort her, which only made it more obvious to everyone in the office that something was going on between them. I was home when Marta burst through the front door at 4:30, waving the divorce papers like a weapon. "What the hell is this?" she screamed. I looked up from my newspaper. "Divorce papers. I thought that was fairly obvious." "You can't divorce me. I was going to divorce you." "Well," I said calmly, "looks like I beat you to it. Early bird gets the worm and all that. This is ridiculous. You have no grounds for divorce." I set down my newspaper and looked at her with the most innocent expression I could manage. "No grounds? Marta, I have photographs of you and Jake entering and leaving hotel rooms together. I have emails where you discuss your affair in explicit detail. I have documentation of you using company resources for personal activities." Should I go on? Her face went through several shades of pale before settling on a sickly green. "You've been spying on me? I've been paying attention. There's a difference. This prenup is garbage," she said, waving the papers again. "No court will uphold this. Actually, Harold Brennan seems to think it's pretty solid. You remember Harold, don't you? The lawyer your mother insisted we use because she was so worried about protecting your assets?" Marta sank into a chair, the fight going out of her. "Evan, we can work this out. We don't need to involve lawyers." "Oh, but we do," I said. "You see, Marta, you and Jake made a critical error in your planning. You assumed I was too stupid to figure out what you were doing. You assumed I'd just roll over and let you take everything I'd worked for. You assumed wrong. What do you want? I want you out of my house by Sunday. You can take your clothes and whatever personal items you brought into the marriage. Everything else stays here. You can't throw me out of my own house. Actually, I can. It's all explained in the prenup you signed, the one you've been trying so hard to break." Marta's phone started ringing. She looked at the caller ID and her face went even paler. "That's probably Jake," I said helpfully. "I imagine he's having a very interesting conversation with his wife right about now." She answered the phone with a shaking hand. "Jake? What's wrong?" I couldn't hear his side of the conversation, but from Marta's responses, it was clear that Jake's wife had received her own set of papers. "She what? How did she find out?" "No, we can't meet tonight. Evan knows everything." She hung up the phone and looked at me with a mixture of hatred and desperation. "You've ruined everything," she said. "No, Marta. You ruined everything. I just made sure there were consequences." That weekend, I watched as Marta packed her belongings into suitcases and boxes. 23 years of marriage reduced to whatever would fit in her car. "Where will you go?" I asked, not because I cared, but because I was curious. "Victoria's," she said without looking at me. Victoria, her sister, who had been part of those girls' nights where they'd discussed Jake's impressive arms. I wondered how long that arrangement would last once Victoria realized she was harboring a woman who'd just lost everything in a very public and humiliating divorce. "What about Jake?" I asked. "What about him?" she snapped. "His wife froze all their accounts. He's probably going to lose his job. We're both screwed thanks to you." "Thanks to me?" "Marta, I didn't make you have an affair. I didn't make you plot to frame me for professional misconduct. I didn't make you use company resources to pay for hotel rooms. You did all of that yourself." She slammed the last suitcase shut and turned to face me. "This isn't over, Evan. I'll fight this." "With what money?" "Your accounts are frozen pending the divorce proceedings. Jake's in the same boat. And I don't think either of your employers are going to be very understanding about the situation." Marta left that Sunday afternoon without another word. I stood at the window and watched her drive away, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. 23 years of marriage, and it had come to this, but I wasn't done yet. Marta and Jake had tried to destroy me, and I was going to make sure they understood the full consequences of that decision. With Marta gone, I had the house to myself for the first time in over 2 decades. It should have felt lonely, but instead it felt peaceful. No more lies and no more pretending, No more walking on eggshells around someone who thought I was beneath her. The divorce proceedings moved quickly. Harold had filed all the right papers, and with the evidence we had, Marta's lawyer couldn't mount much of a defense. The prenup was ironclad, and her cheating was thoroughly documented. But I wasn't satisfied with just winning the legal battle. Jake had tried to humiliate me, to make me look like a fool while they destroyed my life. I wanted them to understand what real humiliation felt like. I started with social media. Marta had always been active on Facebook, posting carefully curated photos of our perfect life. Her friends and family followed her updates religiously, commenting on her success at work and her wonderful marriage. Now it was time to set the record straight. I created a detailed post explaining the situation, complete with screenshots of some of the less explicit emails between Marta and Jake. I tagged all of her friends and family members, making sure everyone would see it. After 23 years of marriage, I've discovered that my wife Marta has been having an affair with her coworker Jake Turnbull. They've been using company resources to pay for hotel rooms and have been plotting to frame me for professional misconduct to get around our prenuptial agreement. I thought her friends and family should know the truth about why our marriage is ending. The post went viral within hours. Marta's friends started commenting, expressing shock and disbelief. Her family members chimed in, some supporting her, others condemning her behavior. The whole thing turned into a public spectacle that was visible to anyone who cared to look. But I wasn't done yet. I discovered that Jake lived in an upscale condo complex downtown, the kind of place where image was everything and scandal was not tolerated. I printed out copies of some of the more damaging emails and photos, then distributed them to every mailbox in his building. The next morning, Jake called me directly. "You son of an unpleasant person," he said without preamble. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" "I'm making sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you are," I replied calmly. "You can't just distribute private emails like that. It's harassment." "Actually, Jake, once you send an email plotting to defraud someone, it becomes evidence of a crime. I'm just sharing evidence." "This is insane. You're destroying people's lives." "No, Jake. You destroyed your own life when you decided to sleep with my wife and plot to frame me for your failures. I'm just making sure everyone knows about it." He hung up on me, but I wasn't finished with him yet. Jake's condo building had a parking garage with assigned spaces. I waited until late at night and then paid his BMW another visit. This time, I filled the exhaust pipe with raw shrimp and left a note under his windshield. "Hope you enjoy the smell as much as I enjoyed your emails." The next day, Jake's car was towed from the building's parking garage after other residents complained about the smell. According to my source in the building, a maintenance worker I'd befriended, Jake had been asked to find alternative living arrangements due to conduct unbecoming a resident. Meanwhile, Martin was discovering that her sister Victoria's hospitality had limits. Victoria called me directly, something she hadn't done in years. "Evan, you need to take Marta back," she said without preamble. "I'm sorry, Victoria, but that's not going to happen. She can't stay here indefinitely. My husband is furious about the whole situation. The neighbors are talking. It's affecting my family." "That sounds like Marta's problem, not mine." "Don't be vindictive, Evan. She made a mistake, but she's still family." "Victoria, she didn't make a mistake. She conducted a calculated affair while plotting to frame me for professional misconduct. That's not a mistake, that's a betrayal." "But where's she supposed to go?" "I honestly don't care. She should have thought about that before she decided to destroy our marriage." Victoria hung up on me, but I knew I'd made my point. Marta was quickly running out of friends and family willing to support her. The situation at T-Bold Advertising was even worse for both of them. Word of the affair had spread throughout the company, and their boss, a conservative family man named Robert Chen, was not amused by the scandal. I learned through Mike's contacts that both Marta and Jake had been placed on administrative leave while the company investigated their use of company resources for personal activities. The hotel receipts I'd found showed a clear pattern of using the company credit card for their affairs. But the final blow came from an unexpected source. Jake's wife Diana, the prominent family law attorney, decided to make an example of her cheating husband. She filed for divorce and immediately froze all of their joint accounts, leaving Jake with no access to money while the proceedings played out. More importantly, Diana filed a lawsuit against both Jake and Marta for intentional infliction of emotional distress and alienation of affection. The lawsuit was a matter of public record, which meant it showed up in local legal publications and online databases. Jake's professional reputation was destroyed overnight. No advertising agency in the city would hire someone involved in such a public scandal, especially someone who'd been caught using company resources for personal activities. Marta's situation was even worse. Not only was she facing the same professional consequences as Jake, but she had no money and nowhere to live. Victoria had finally asked her to leave, and none of her other friends were willing to take her in. I heard through the neighborhood gossip network that Marta was living in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, working as a waitress at a chain restaurant to pay for her room and legal fees. The woman who had once looked down on me for my pathetic salary was now making minimum wage and living in a place that rented rooms by the week. Jake's fall was just as spectacular. His wife's lawsuit had made him unemployable in his chosen field, and his expensive lifestyle had left him with no savings to fall back on. He'd been forced to sell his beloved BMW to pay for legal fees and was reportedly living in his sister's basement. 6 months after I'd filed for divorce, both Marta and Jake had lost everything: their jobs, their reputations, their financial security, and their social standing. They'd gone from successful professionals having an affair to unemployed pariahs living on charity. And I was just getting started. The divorce was finalized on a cold Tuesday morning in February. I sat in Harold Brennan's office, signing the final papers that officially ended my 23-year marriage. "It's done," Harold said, closing the file. "The house is yours, along with all marital assets. Marta gets nothing except what she brought into the marriage." Which was essentially nothing, I noted. "Exactly. She also owes you damages for emotional distress in the amount of $50,000, though I doubt she'll ever be able to pay it." I left the courthouse feeling lighter than I had in years. Marta had tried to destroy me, and instead, she'd destroyed herself. But I had one final surprise planned for her and Jake. Over the past few months, I'd been in contact with several of their former clients at T-Bold Advertising. It turned out that Marta and Jake's affair had affected more than just their personal lives. It had also compromised several major accounts. The Peterson account, which they'd planned to blame on me, had been lost entirely when the client discovered that the account managers were more interested in each other than in their business. 2 other major clients had also pulled their accounts after learning about the scandal. T-Bold Advertising was facing serious financial difficulties as a result of Marta and Jake's behavior, but I had an idea that would solve everyone's problems. I contacted Robert Chen, the owner of T-Bold, and proposed a solution. My company, Hartwell Industries, was looking for a new advertising agency. We were prepared to offer T-Bold a major contract that would more than make up for the accounts they'd lost. There was just one condition. The contract specifically excluded Marta Marks and Jake Turnbull from any involvement in the account. In fact, it included a clause stating that if either of them were ever rehired by T-Bold, the contract would be immediately terminated. Robert Chen accepted the offer immediately. Not only did it save his company, but it ensured that Marta and Jake would never work in advertising again, at least not in our city. But I saved the best for last. I'd learned that Marta and Jake were still seeing each other, despite everything that had happened. They'd rented a small apartment together on the wrong side of town, both working minimum wage jobs and blaming everyone but themselves for their situation. I decided it was time for a final confrontation. I waited outside the restaurant where Marta was working, a family chain place that was a far cry from the upscale establishments she used to frequent. When her shift ended at 11 p.m., I was waiting by her car, a 10-year-old Honda that had seen better days. "Hello, Marta," I said as she approached. She stopped dead in her tracks, her face going pale in the parking lot lights. "What are you doing here, Evan?" "I wanted to see how you were adjusting to your new life." She looked older, tired. The expensive clothes and perfect hair were gone, replaced by a cheap uniform and ponytail held together with a rubber band. "What do you want?" she asked. "I want you to understand something," I said. "You spent years treating me like I was stupid, like I was beneath you. You plotted to destroy my life, to frame me for your failures, to take everything I'd worked for." "Evan, I'm not finished," I interrupted. "You thought you were so clever, you and Jake. You thought you could outsmart the boring guy in the Honda Civic, but you made one critical error." "What's that?" "You underestimated me. You assumed that because I was quiet, I was weak. You assumed that because I didn't play office politics, I didn't understand how the game worked. You were wrong." Marta's eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't done yet. "Do you know what the difference is between us, Marta? I built my life on solid ground. I worked hard, saved money, treated people with respect. You built your life on lies and manipulation and the belief that you were better than everyone else. I know I made mistakes. You didn't make mistakes. You made choices. And now you're living with the consequences of those choices. I pulled out an envelope and handed it to her. What's this? She asked. Divorce papers. Final decree. You're officially free to marry Jake now, if he'll still have you. She opened the envelope and stared at the papers. Why are you giving me this? Because I want you to understand that this is over. You lost. Not because I'm vindictive, not because I'm cruel, but because you chose to betray someone who loved you, and actions have consequences. I turned to walk away, then stopped and looked back at her one more time. Oh, and Marta? The Peterson account that you were going to blame on me? I just signed them as a client for my new consulting business. Turns out they were very interested in working with someone who actually cares about their success. I left her standing in that parking lot, holding the divorce papers and finally understanding the full scope of what she'd lost. 6 months later, I heard that Marta and Jake had broken up. Apparently, poverty and public humiliation weren't as romantic as hotel rooms and stolen moments. Jake had moved to another state, trying to rebuild his career under an assumed name. Marta was still in town, still working minimum wage jobs, still paying the price for her choices. As for me, I bought a new car. Nothing fancy, just a reliable sedan that suited my practical nature. I kept the house, started my consulting business, and began dating a lovely woman named Sarah, who appreciated my quiet sense of humor and steady character. My kids, Ross and Amelia, had been shocked by the divorce at first. But once they learned the truth about what their mother had done, they understood. They still maintained a relationship with Marta, but they lived with me when they came home from college. Sometimes late at night, I think about those 23 years of marriage and wonder if I should feel guilty about how completely I destroyed Marta and Jake's lives. But then I remember the emails, the plotting, the years of being treated like I was worthless, and I realized that they brought this on themselves. I didn't set out to be vindictive. I just refused to be a sufferer. And in the end, that made all the difference. The end.